rational as arguing that the moon must be made out of cheese because he once got hit in the head by a lump of moldy cheese that must have fallen off the moon. That also just happened to coincide with hearing the mousetrap on the far side of the room go off. So let's give Eric Matinchonhor our undivided and see if he can make anything close to a salient point in trying to establish that atheism is dead. Which I guess would make all of us non-believers some kind of ghosts, or maybe zombies, which would mean that we crave brains, which would mean that Eric has nothing to fear from us. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, preferring practical, provable principles, pushing past pious pretenses, and promoting progressive, positive perspectives while purging praising proselytizers may keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Today, the logical question to ask, and I'm not making this up, is atheism dead? I actually say atheism as an intellectual idea is dead. There may be a lot of atheists, but there are a lot of flat earthers. It doesn't change the fact that we know the earth is not flat.
Careful, Eric. I wouldn't go too far with that particular analogy, because the Venn diagram of flat earthers and God believers has quite a bit of overlap. I mean, not all theists are flat earthers, but pretty much all flat earthers are theists. Kind of like how all young earth creationists are theists. Flat earth mostly is a radical offshoot of theism. I mean, how are you going to believe that we live on a flat pizza that defies all known laws of physics unless you think there's a magical, all-powerful being out there making it so? So, that's not the best analogy for your position. All you're pointing out is that there can be a lot of people who cling to stubborn, irrational beliefs in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. Like belief in God, for instance.
Einstein, in 1911, you can't think of a greater scientist except for Isaac Newton than Albert Einstein. In 1911, his equations were leading him to believe the universe is expanding, which means that if it's expanding, that at one point, if you go backwards from where it expanded, that it started at a single point. This was what Einstein came up with privately. As a scientist, he thought, this is embarrassing. People are going to accuse me of being a creationist, of talking about the Bible. So I have to hide this information. So he created this cosmological constant, this fudge factor, because he was so embarrassed by what the evidence from science was showing.
That's not entirely accurate.
For starters, no, Einstein did not resist the idea of an expanding universe because he was worried that people would think he was pushing the Bible or God or creationism. In fact, at the time when he made his famous equations about relativity, the prevailing scientific consensus about the universe was that it was static and unchanging in terms of its total size and shape. So Einstein was just going along with the scientific consensus of the day and trying to fit his discoveries into what had already been established. And that was what led to his embarrassment, once it was discovered, thanks to the work of Edwin Hubble, that the universe was indeed expanding. But his only reason for dismissing it was his reluctance to go against the scientific orthodoxy at the time, not because he was afraid he was inadvertently advocating for religion. Einstein was the first to recognize how controversial his ideas might be. In a letter to physicist and friend Paul Ehrenfest in early 1917, Einstein wrote, "I have, again, perpetrated something about gravitational theory which somewhat exposes me to the danger of being confined in a madhouse." Einstein knew that the only reason for his cosmological constant to exist was to secure a static and stable finite universe. He wanted this kind of universe, and he did not want to look much further. Quietly hiding in his equations, though, was another model for the universe, one with an expanding geometry. In 1922, the Russian physicist Alexander Friedmann would find the solution. As for Einstein, it was only in 1931, after visiting Hubble in California, that he accepted cosmic expansion and discarded at long last his vision of a static cosmos. His only real embarrassment came because he didn't follow the science, but instead kowtowed to what the general consensus was. something science and scientists should never do, because reality isn't based on what most people think. But then furthermore, how the hell is this supposed to point to a god in the first place? The fact that the universe is expanding in no way points to any god. I mean, this story alone testifies to that. We've known definitively now for the last 100 years that the universe is indeed expanding and has been ever since the Big Bang. And none of the physicists who proved that initially, nor any of the work that has been done in that field in the preceding 100 years, has claimed that it pointed to any kind of God being at work. In fact, not only do scientists in general have the lowest amount of God belief and the highest concentration of atheists, but even among scientists, do you know who reports the absolute lowest percentage of God belief? That would be physicists and astronomers. Now, why would that be if the movements of the universe, the very things that they spend their life studying, pointed to the existence of a divine creator?
And so this concept of the Big Bang developed where scientists were embarrassed because they said, well, it looks like the universe was created out of nothing. That's what science is saying.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
Ahem. The Big Bang was not the explosion of the universe out of nothing. It is the expansion of the current presentation of our universe from an initial state of high density and temperature. I would have to say, probably more than anything else in the entire grab bag of creationist, apologist, oft-repeated flotsam, this one right here absolutely takes the cake. And it, more than anything else, shows their inherent dishonesty. No scientist, no physicist, no astronomer, no cosmologist, absolutely none of them say that the universe came from nothing. Not even Lawrence Krauss claimed that the universe came from nothing, and he literally wrote a book titled A Universe from Nothing. But he explains in the book that he's using the term nothing a bit facetiously, and the nothing he's talking about is still filled with all kinds of stuff.
When you think about nothing, you have to be a little more careful than you normally are, because in fact nothing is a physical concept, because it's the absence of something, and something is a physical concept. And what we've learned over the last 100 years is that nothing is much more complicated than we would have imagined otherwise. For example, the simplest kind of nothing is the kind of nothing of the Bible, say an infinite empty space, an infinite dark void of the Bible. You know, nothing in it, no particles, no radiation, nothing. Well, that kind of nothing turns out to be full of stuff in a way, or at least much more complicated than you might have imagined, because due to the laws of quantum mechanics and relativity, we now know that empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles that are popping in and out of existence at every moment. And in fact, for that kind of nothing, if you wait long enough, you're guaranteed by the laws of quantum mechanics to produce something.
But every source you could ever look for will say over and over and over again how the universal expansion began from something like a primordial singularity, or a point of infinite density